Thank you very much, Dr. Ndukwe, for joining us on the program. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's a big pleasure.
Right. So you listened to the president's democracy, or rather, Independence Day speech yesterday. What for you was key from what he said?
I think you mentioned something in your opening remarks, which was a statement about removal of subsidy. I think I will start by congratulating the president for the boldness and the courage to deal with that issue of subsidy removal. Because to tell you the truth, that has been a single uh, most terrible thing about the country for many years, source of a lot of corruption, and as well as a drain on the finances that government should have applied to infrastructure development. So I like the idea that he spoke about it and actually compared Nigeria with other nations that are also oil producing, where such subsidies don't exist. So I think that's the major takeaway for me as far as the president's speech is concerned.
Now, talking about subsidy, I mean, we keep saying, oh, removal of subsidy, we've removed the subsidy. One thing is to remove the subsidy. Another question is, these monies, where would it be channeled to? Well, it is expected that these subsidies that have been removed should be channeled to development projects, such as infrastructure development. Now, for you, I mean, this is an area where you are an expert in. We're talking about power, we're talking about road, we're talking about railway, we're talking about technology. For you, what is key? What should they be doing with this subsidy removal? Because I think that should be the main question, and what perhaps even the labor that is fighting for this subsidy thing and all of that to ask, where are we channeling these monies to?
I think, like you said, one important area to channel the monies to is in the area of infrastructure development, both soft infrastructure and the hard infrastructure. As you know, we are lagging behind many countries as far as infrastructure development is concerned. The state of infrastructure in the environment leaves so much to be desired. Successive governments should have done more, especially during the oil boom days. And there are quite a number of areas of infrastructure that stand out for me. One is roads. We need to really put a lot of money to building roads infrastructure. Like a Chinese proverb said, if you want to prosper, first build roads. We don't have enough highways in the country today. We really need to devote a lot of resources to building our roads infrastructure. And the second area that I would like to see is in terms of power infrastructure, which is still at a level that also leaves so much to be desired. The third area is in the railways, which government is doing a bit about at the moment. But it had suffered a lot of neglect in the past. And what this has done is to transfer pressure from the railways to our roads. And that has led to even further deterioration of many of our important highways. So one would like to see a move towards putting a lot of money and investment into roads infrastructure. Of course, working side by side with the private sector, because at the stage we are today, I think private sector involvement is so critical to improving our infrastructure development generally.
All right, I want us to look at the issue of infrastructure financing. That has been, that's one of the challenge of fixing infrastructure. And then yesterday, when the Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, was speaking on our show, he talked about two choices: to borrow or to increase taxes. Which of these choices for you is most suitable for Nigeria at this point? We've heard so many people talk about mortgaging the future of our children. That is when you talk about borrowing for you. What choice should Nigeria rather take at this point?
I think, first of all, taxation is an important component of government source of revenue. There is a limit to how much you can tax. So borrowing is an alternative, but there is also a limit to how much we can encourage government to borrow. So for me, it's a mixed bag. It's a mix of the two. We can't run away from looking for areas where taxes have to increase. I think the first thing is to remove what government has done now is to remove subsidy the way we were doing in the past. That will release a lot of money to the economy for financing infrastructure development. Take an example for roads, for instance. It might not be direct taxation, it might be indirect. For busy highways, there is no reason why we can't ensure that we have toll plazas on major highways that are busy. Because with that, you have enough money to ensure that the roads are well maintained. Quite honestly, if I'm given a choice between having subsidy on petroleum products, for instance, and having better and well-built roads, my choice will be to have better and well-built roads. I was reading something on WhatsApp the other day about a gentleman who was moaning about a journey that should have taken him 30 minutes, that he was on that journey for over 2.5 hours. And yet, eventually he had to turn back because the roads were particularly bad. So the truth is that if you have better roads, you actually save money on petroleum that you burn on your roads, and life is even of a better quality than we have today. So to answer your question, I'm not sure it's a question of either this or the other. I think it's something that we have to have a mixed bag and do whatever is necessary for each one. Government has to look at points where taxation might be necessary and other areas where borrowing might also be necessary. But at the end of the day, what matters is good governance processes, less corruption. When we borrow money, let the money be used for actually the reasons for which they are borrowed for. And then we should borrow for building infrastructure, not for paying salaries and things like that. So all those things are very important. Once we take the right decisions and do things the right way, I think we should be fine as a nation.
Now, what is your take on the China's Belt and Road Initiative as a way of financing infrastructure?
Quite honestly, there's been a lot of talk about that particular initiative. I must say that it's also part of borrowing. I'm not sure the money is free of charge. And when you have to borrow, you must also make sure that you borrow rightly. One thing that has occurred to me recently is whether the Chinese loans to developing countries should not be channeled through private companies that are in a better position to use that money judiciously and also be accountable for such monies. Because what has happened in many countries, I am not talking about Nigeria today, in many countries, some of these monies are borrowed. Labor is imported from China mostly. And at the end of the day, you're not too sure whether the country is benefiting maximally from such loans. So if it's free money, then that's not a problem. But if we are talking about really borrowing for which we have to pay back subsequently, then we must look at everything properly and make sure that we do the right things. And like this proposal I'm talking about, where some of such monies can actually be channeled through private sector companies that are able to account for those monies properly, of course, with government providing whatever guarantees that are required in terms of sovereign guarantees, and also monitor that such monies are used judiciously. Thank you very much.
All right, you talked about earlier, or you talked about issue of public-private sector PPP initiative, and the private sector can only be attracted to invest in areas that are very commercially profitable, but not all the infrastructures are commercially attractive. Is this not a major limitation to PPP?
Quite honestly, it's true that mostly private sector funds are channeled towards where there is some return on investment. But there are ways around these things. And the ways around them include incentives. Private sector can be convinced to go to areas that are not particularly profitable when those areas are given out in combination with areas that are profitable. I don't know if you get the point I'm making. For instance, in the sector that I'm used to, in those early days of telecom development, it used to be said that if you're given license for a very profitable environment, government can actually include some other areas that are not so profitable and insist that those areas should be developed side by side. The same thing with roads infrastructure. If you give incentive or give a road concession to a major highway that is very profitable, you can actually add to it some side roads and some smaller highways that must be done with those roads at the same time, so that revenues that come from such profitable roads can also be channeled to build some other roads that are not that profitable. So policy guidelines and regulation come into play. And also, I think it's important to also say that when we do these things, government must always have in mind that it's a win-win situation. Once you see the private sector as a partner in progress, then you're able to take good decisions and look at private sector as a partner and make sure that you discuss with such partners about what you want done and make sure that they're included in the overall plan. But I think incentive is very important. I give another example. For instance, many states in the Federation today charge what is called right-of-way charges to private operating companies, especially in the ICT area. I was surprised when they charge the same thing for very rural communities where you have very low population densities and where recovery of infrastructure investment would be very, very low and slow. So when you have situations of that nature, governments should actually find a way of incentivizing service providers to go to those areas by removing some of those right-of-way charges, by reducing taxation for them in those areas so that they're encouraged to go there, so that even if they are making small money, at least they'll recover the investment, even if they don't make profit. But if there is so much barrier to investment, people will shy away from those areas. And what happens is that those communities lose out completely. So that's why I'm saying policy, regulation, incentives are so critical in making sure that we do these things right when we are looking at PPP situations.
All right, thank you very much for your time, Dr. Ernest Njukwe. He is the Chairman, MTN Nigeria, and the former Director at the Center for Infrastructure, Policy, Regulation and Advancement at Lagos Business School. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.